So I've been thinking about Nick Fuentes and Baked Alaska, all these people getting banned from DLive, and it's no fun being banned, right? It's humiliating. So you look up a story on Nick Fuentes, you go to Google News, and you see, oh, he's been banned for hate speech, right? Banned by YouTube for hate speech. Been banned by DLive, I assume, for hate speech. And that's going to follow him around. So I got to think that's going to eventually give rise to a substantial amount of litigation, right? Is there any legal category of hate speech, right? Is that a legal thing, right? So what's the legal power of hate speech in American law? Because it certainly seems on the face of it to violate the First Amendment. So hate speech isn't a general legal category in American law. It's just something applied by certain companies, right? So there's got to be an awful amount of social stigma, right, for being banned by a platform for hate speech. So surely people are going to start suing. Now, it seems pretty clear that private companies have the right to decide who gets to be on their platform, but do they have the... What's going to happen, though, with more litigation on this, right? Couldn't a person make a substantial case that their reputation was harmed by being banned for hate speech, or I'll be banned for love speech, or malicious spamming, or what are the other excuses that they give to ban people? And I know Jared Taylor sued Twitter and Dennis Prager sued YouTube, and I believe both cases were pretty soundly rejected. Right? So surely there's going to be some kind of winning legal attack on these widespread big tech bans. So what will be a winning argument for suing big tech? Right? Because having the President of the United States banned for life from Twitter, I mean, surely there's got to be some kind of response to that. Trump is not someone who enjoys being humiliated, so you got to assume that he's developing some kind of legal strategy, and you think that he'd get some high-quality lawyers. So have there been any successful lawsuits against big tech over matters of being banned? I'm not aware of any. So clubs and religious organizations also have the right to ban. I have no problem getting access to automobiles. I just don't want to necessarily live stream while I'm driving. I think it's maybe a tad risky. So I've done a lot of drive streams. Not sure though they're such a good idea. I don't want to live stream all of my life. So surely someone's going to hit on some kind of winning litigation formula for being banned, right? What's the formula? Because there's stigma. Like, let's say you're an esteemed member of your profession, right? You don't want it known that you've been banned from YouTube or banned from Twitter. Like, let's say you're a professor at Harvard or UCLA, and you published in prestigious, peer-reviewed journals, and then for some reason you get banned from YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, right? There's going to be some consequences, you'd think, for big tech, but as of right now, it looks like they have all the power. It's just a gorgeous day in LA. It's about 82 degrees here, January 15th, 2021, 82 degrees. And so I'm just wondering, is there any possibility of some substantial blowback to big tech for their banning of individuals? And it's got to have adverse consequences. Big tech platforms are not the same as religious institutions. An explicit lenience. Yeah, so who's going to mount a successful legal challenge, right? Are there constitutional rights to have a PayPal account or a Twitter account? Okay, so anyone else having problems with my audio? So let me know in the chat if you're having problems with the audio quality. So the prestige hit taken by the Ivies is yet to be calculated. What prestige hit? What prestige hit have the Ivy League universities absorbed? I'm simply not aware of what you're talking about there, Elliot. So my life was forever changed when my father was taken out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Big tech is great lawyers. We just need good lawyers. It's as simple as that. Yeah, but what would be the basis of the legal argument? Big tech companies are acting against the law, says Babcast, but they've got so much to lose if they were indeed acting against the law. Right now, they seem incredibly powerful. And right now, the opposition to big tech seems incredibly puny by comparison. But power doesn't last forever. Yeah, get good lawyers to prove that they're acting as publishers or as editors. Yeah, I think, Claire, you're the only one who's experiencing these audio-visual hallucinations. So, my father got thrown out of the Seventh-day Adventist Church ministry in summer of 1980, right? Because to belong to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and to be in its employment, you have to articulate certain, views that the Seventh-day Adventist Church stands for things. And my father had publicly taken on the foundational principle of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, so he got removed. So there was a lot of blowback and stigma from that. First Amendment is still a thing as far as I know. We ostensibly have a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court. So I just remember how wrenching it was to be removed from the warm bosom of the Seventh-day Adventist Church when I was 14 in summer of 1980. I have to go out onto my own into the world. And now that people are spending so much time online, I understand why it'd be just so absolutely wrenching to be removed from what, feels like a substitute family, I'm sure, for many people. Like particularly during a time of pandemic, we're doing a lot of our socializing online. You need to read Section 230. Yeah, well, how come no one's pulled this off so far? All right? There are a lot of smart people out there, smarter people than me, more legally educated people than me. There are a lot of lawyers out there who like to make money. If this is so easy, Babs, why has not anyone done this? Like, there's money laying on the table. I think Trump is going to pardon anyone except maybe some donor cronies. Yeah, he's got a few days left. If I were a smart, wealthy lawyer, why would I want to take this on? for the prospect of going down in history. Right? You'd become incredibly influential. What wireless provider do you use? I use T-Mobile. So I switched to T-Mobile about 6 or 7 years ago, I think. So they just seem to offer a better deal. And I appreciate the great quality that they provide for these live streams. It's good to be in Beverly Hills. But like once my father was removed from the Seventh-day Adventist ministry, we were as though we had the Scarlet Letter. That's what it felt like. I had the latest iPhone. I have an iPhone 12. I'm a top lawyer. I'm making $1 million a year. I'm not endangering that for some stupid stunt. Yeah, but if you got enough money, a lot of people want to be famous. A lot of people want to set precedents. All right? So what if you're young and ambitious, you want to make a name for yourself? You can make a name for yourself suing big tech on this basis, Babs. So why isn't anyone doing that? So yeah, when my father got removed from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, it felt like we had the mark of Cain on us somewhat. And we went out and we formed our own community, just like people are now being told, well, go out and make your own form of Twitter. Make your own form of YouTube. So my father, 1980, went out and formed his own evangelical Christian foundation, Good News Unlimited. And we had our own church meetings on Saturday mornings. We had our own financial supporters. We had our own community. We had our own group. And wasn't as good as the more organized Seventh-day Adventist version. So it's definitely a shock to the system to get banned. And then I went on to recreate this most painful part of my childhood over and over and over again. Getting banned from all sorts of places. So the sun is so bright, I'm having a hard time reading the chat right now, but I will read the chat later. And what happens is once you get banned from one place, everyone else, if they have the slightest inkling to ban you, it's a lot easier for them to ban you, that they can just essentially follow precedent. So that's why it wasn't surprising that Trump got banned from Twitter, and then it was Facebook, and then a dozen different social media platforms. Once you get banned from one, this isn't just like some big tech corporate crony, oligarch platform. This is what happens in life. Like once you get banned from one synagogue, it tends to cascade, right? Because let's say, that Levi's been banned from one synagogue, then why would you want him in your synagogue, right? If someone's been divorced once, right, that's a sign that there are really poor odds of making a successful marriage with this person, right? Someone who's divorced once is much more likely to get divorced again than to make a successful marriage, right? So that's why divorce is a form of stigma. It kind of points you out as someone who's essentially low in agreeableness. Once you get fired, right, from one job, if it's known in your field, then it's much, much harder to get hired in the same field. Right? There's a substantial stigma often for getting fired if you're in a close-knit field. So it just seems to cascade. And then, what else is going on here? Because I've had way too much familiarity with getting banned and then having that ban function just cascade. Right, so another part of the story is that I think for most people who get banned or who get fired, that they are out of touch with reality, that they want to belong to communities or groups or organizations that don't want them. Right? They want to belong to a synagogue, but they don't want to abide by the norms of behavior that go with that synagogue. Or you want to belong to YouTube, but you don't want to abide by the norms of behavior that accompany YouTube. So it's a disconnect. People want a lot of different things, and when they're unwilling to come to clarity on this, they try to have it all. And then there's a mismatch between what they want, what they're willing to live with, and the consequences. And so as a result, failing to stay in touch with reality, you get banned. Right? You want to belong to a church, but you don't want to abide publicly by its stated beliefs and practices. Okay, now I'm in the shade. Now I can. It's the same miserable doomer stuff. Luke always says you need the will to power. The world can be changed to be made better. Rules on social media are tightening. Yeah, I'm wearing blue because I might be mistaken for a gang member. But yeah, I think of a lot of it is just that we want mutually incompatible things, that we got various parts of our life that don't work with other parts of our life, right? It's a unwillingness to come to terms with reality, to accept reality, to accept life on life's terms. And so when we try to have it all, we end up losing it all. So when someone gets banned, right, usually that's an indication that they've gotten out of touch with reality, that they joined something, and at the same time they weren't willing to abide by the terms of service of that organization or that group or that club or that app, right? You're not willing to accept reality. So all my life I've struggled with this opposition between freedom and community. Right? I love being in community. I love being a part of something larger than myself. I love being connected with other people. I love being parts of groups, clubs, organizations, synagogues, etc. At the same time, I want maximum freedom to say what I believe. And these are totally in contradiction. So think about David Friedrich Strauss, who wrote The Life of Jesus in 1835. And as a result, he was socially ostracized. He lost his prestigious position as a university lecturer. He's never able to hold such a prestigious position again. Then he wasn't able to get married, have family. He paid a really big price for saying things that were not socially acceptable. And so he became a free speech hero to many classical liberals in the 19th century, but he paid the price for stepping out on the rules and paid the price in misery. And who wants to pay that price? So I'm just so intimately aware in my own experience of how you get banned from one place, that just cascades. Right? Other people pick up on those social cues often, and they react to you as, you're a guy who's not willing to play by the rules. There's someone who's not safe. And why don't we just get rid of you as well? So every group has those damn rules. And sometimes people don't have the discipline to live by the rules. Other times they think that they could live by the rules, but they eventually find the rules unbearable. Other times they're unaware that they're breaking the rules. Sometimes the rules change on them. So that while at first the terms of service, say on YouTube, were quite easy to deal with, by 2017 they were becoming increasingly restrictive. And so terms of service that you're willing to abide by in 2017, for example, they can become unbearable and impossible in 2020. So I've had a real hard time, abiding by the rules in my life. But I've often, I just wanted to do my own thing, had a complete inability to see things from other people's point of view. And so this has resulted in expulsion, has resulted in failure, in banning. And so I think integrity is an issue here, right? Integrity comes back to the word integral, meaning one. So you ideally want to have a life where all the different parts of your life are not at war with each other, right? You don't want to be pursuing hobbies that'd be considered scandalous by your work community or your religious community. You don't want to be doing work that is at odds with your religion. You don't want to be saying one thing to friends in one part of your life and then espousing something completely different to friends in another part of your life, so that if what you're saying and doing became more well known, that it would require a fracture, a split, separation. Right? Ideally, the things I say here, they're in consonance with what I say in synagogue, what I say in a work situation, what I say with clients, what I say with friends. So for much of my life, I would employ code switching. So code switching in and of itself is not dangerous, right? Code switch means you speak one way to your parents, and as soon as you leave your house, speak a different way. So in one sense, that's very typical. I'd speak one way to my parents, then I'd leave the house, speak a completely different way. I just feel like a completely different person once I got out and away from my parents. But maybe it's just a matter of degrees, right? If you're code switching to the extent that it would cause horror and a great pain and dislocation to the various parts of your life, then that's a degree of code switching, right, that becomes not so social. So YouTube's terms of service, Twitter's terms of service, they have real world effects, right? They are, I think, in part reflections of the real world. I don't see the online world as separate from the real world. I see the online world as part of the real world. My hobby is cord cutting. I don't use cable or any proprietary streaming. Interesting. So social norms change. All sorts of norms changed after what happened on Capitol Hill last week, right? The world changed. Sorry. And so language and arguments that work one day, right, you have to shy away from them the next day, because that same language and arguments have been used in criminal behavior, right? So all sorts of things that are acceptable one day, like Stop the Steal, was just a joke one moment, and then it led to a deadly riot. So Stop the Steal took on whole new connotations after the riot on Capitol Hill. And Trust the Plan, right, that took on whole new connotations after that disaster on Capitol Hill last week. So also the speech that we use online, it's always going to feed back into how we speak in real life. So if you're getting banned on an online platform such as YouTube and Twitter, you're very likely to have problems in real life too. Because I see YouTube and Twitter so much more reflective of normal social concerns, standards, proprieties, than separate from them. So I think a lot of people in the distant sphere become used to a certain type of, raw language online, that we don't tend to censor ourselves as much online as we do in real life because we don't get the social cues as much. So people become used to using language and making sentiments that are completely unacceptable in the real world. And so they've rewired their brains to certain rhetoric, certain arguments, to certain jokes, oven jokes that are completely unacceptable in the real world. And once they've gotten into the habit of making these jokes online, then it starts to infiltrate their real life. And then that is grounds for trouble. Right, so everything we do starts to form habits and patterns. The language that we use here in this chat, it's going to come out in the real world in how we speak to our parents and how we speak to our friends and how we speak to clients and classmates. So it's a tricky dance. So I live in Los Angeles, and people in West Los Angeles, of course, they tend to be quite liberal. So if I'm going to talk about politics here when I'm out socializing with people who are liberal, I'm going to talk about it in a different way than I would on this live stream, generally speaking. I'm going to talk about it in a way that liberals can understand, that lefties can understand. So I'm going to look for humor or irony. I'm going to have to work a lot harder to make my speech and my sentiments socially acceptable, that people are going to be able to relate to them, people with very different political perspectives from mine. So I think some of getting banned is just a result of the inability to put in the work to conform to new social guidelines, right? It takes effort to consider where the other person is at. It takes effort to consider what the other person is able to hear. You have to put a little work in. You have to expend some mental energy. You can't be as raw. You can't just emote. You can't just react instinctively when you're dealing with people who have a completely different religious or political or cultural point of view. But if you put a little bit of effort into understanding where other people are coming from, then that can pay dividends, right? You can be part of a wider variety of social circles. You're going to be less likely to be a pariah. So I guess it depends on how much you've got to lose. If you're a liberal, you don't need to code switch because your worldview is hegemonic. Yeah, unless you get into a community of people who are right-wing. So I think liberals have a lot more problem code switching than conservatives, because generally speaking, conservatives who are intelligent, they can almost always articulate the liberal point of view on things. But for liberals, it's fairly rare that they're able to see things from the conservative point of view. So I noticed during the Obama years, like a lot of liberals would say things to me like, well, why do Republicans hate Obama so much? It's just completely unfathomable to them why someone would hate Obama. The only reason that people would do that from their point of view was if someone was a racist, and someone was a Neanderthal. Only Neanderthals could hate, a good, kind, just man like Barack Obama. So liberals have a hard time understanding why anyone would oppose abortion, or why someone might be opposed to affirmative action. So generally speaking, I find in my social circles that conservatives can almost always understand and articulate the liberal point of view, and they can kind of accommodate that in their speech if they wish to. So they can code switch so that they can speak in a way that liberals can hear it if they care to. But generally speaking, I notice that liberals are much less adept at code switching compared to conservatives. So universities seem like a kind of a pilot project for speech restrictions, right? We saw these massive kinds of speech restrictions, first of all in universities. Now they're being replicated on social media platforms. So universities, well, the vanguard of the proletariat. These speech codes started hitting in the universities in the 1990s. Now they've translated out into big tech, and now like the Realtors Association says that even if you use hate speech in your, in a private conversation, you can still be banned. I mean, I think that's massive, right? You're biased because you're meeting minority conservatives in blue. Go to the countryside and Yoko conservatives, they don't understand the other point of view, says Babs. Yeah, so I'm just talking from my experience, but also Jonathan Haidt says this as well, that conservatives, by and large, are better able to understand and articulate the liberal point of view, far better at seeing the other perspective compared to liberals, generally speaking, have a much harder time articulating the conservative point of view. So this isn't just my experience, it's science, bro. It's research backed up by Jonathan Haidt. So where will these speech platforms go to next? So Realtors Association, I think they got something like 1.4 million members. So they've now got incredibly strict speech code, not just for one's professional dealings, but even in one's private life, right? So is there going to be a legal challenge against that? Can an association of realtors regulate how you speak privately? Because you could be cut off from quite valuable listings. It'll make your job of selling real estate much more difficult if you're kicked out of this Realtors Association. And so also various state bars have tried to implement speech restrictions. And then one case, I think in Pennsylvania, it was overturned. But there are speech restrictions for lawyers, because it's understandable how a group like lawyers or doctors or realtors would want to establish certain codes of behavior, right? And we have to expel people for any kind of behavior that puts their group or profession into low repute. But YouTube's terms of service, they seem to be spreading through society more widely. So realtors, doctors, lawyers, it seems like the more prestigious your position, the more liable you are to speech restrictions, to speech codes, to being cancelled. So a plumber, generally speaking, faces fewer restrictions with his speech than, say, a university professor or a TV news reader. But it seems inevitable at this rate that more and more professions are going to have speech codes. Importance of free speech was only a value when the elite needed it. Now that they've seized power, they don't need it anymore, says Half Galician. So which professions are going to start instituting restrictive speech codes? Will accountants start doing this, and dentists, general contractors? Of course, university professors already face this. University students already deal with honor codes and speech codes. So it seems at this point it's inevitable that these speech codes and speech restrictions will expand throughout the professions. Like, will you now have, say, a homeowners association? Will they start to come up with speech codes and speech restrictions? Or a condominium, if you're a part of a condo complex, will they start developing speech restrictions? Will there be speech restrictions for using public transport, or for using Uber or Lyft? Airbnb's got some pretty strict speech restrictions. Like airlines, more and more people are getting on no-fly zones, right? Simply on the basis of speech. Is that true? I hear concern about that. Banks are withdrawing services from people whose politics they don't like on the right. People are losing their checking accounts and their savings accounts. So the trend seems to be overwhelmingly in one direction, towards more restriction. So the one trend that I see that is opposed to that is blockchain technology. So with blockchain technology, we may well have the development with things like DLive of more places on the internet where we can speak freely. So that's George Gilder's prediction, that he thinks that Google is going to lose its supremacy, and that due to the rise of blockchain technology, we will have more and more spaces online where we can speak freely. Like, surely conservatives now see the importance of developing their own social media networks. So there's Rumble, and Rebecca Mercer was funding Parler. So you'd think that eventually Parler would get its act together. Right? You'd think that the increase in blockchain technology will create more and more places online where we can speak freely. And you'd think that conservatives would now see the need to establish social media, video sharing sites, where people can speak freely and articulate, say, a right-wing point of view. So on the one hand, most ostensible trends are really bad for free speech. On the other hand, one possible trend that is positive is the rise of blockchain technology. So do not despair. Where there is life, there is hope. I've been unable to read the chat because it's so bright and sunny outside, so I will review the chat, I'll read it, and then I will respond later.